This is the fifth part of our behaviors unit. Most of this comes from chapter 8 in our book. You will notice there's going to be a lot of vocabulary words in this section. When you're doing your writings, make sure that you apply the vocabulary words, and as I have stated a lot of times when we're practicing questions, close the loop. Use examples or something to show that you understand more than just a straight out definition here. So this is the beginning part for our political parties. Going back to a term that we had before, the political parties are one of our examples of a linkage institution, something that links you to the policy makers there. So if you're involved in a political party, that can go in where your ideas can be spread, and they can also communicate with you. That goes along with media, election, interest groups, or other linkage institutions. Now, why do they exist? The very simple answer is to win elections. Do not put that as just your only answer, because why do they want to win elections is where you go a lot deeper than that side of it. So why do they want to win elections? Because they want to control the political agenda. The Democrats want to win this upcoming election, not only for the president, they want to win the Senate. If they can win the Senate, keep the House, and win the presidency, they will be able to control the political agenda with limited checks and balances in that way. The idea to push the party agenda, that is where the ideas that you have as a party, whether it be like if you are wanting more gun control or you're wanting more national health care for the Democrats, for Republicans, it may be less business regulations. So those are different things on their agenda on there. The one bottom little thing on there would be loyal opposition. The one time in American history that we really didn't have a second party was a short time period in the 1820s, and this is where sometimes you need to have that debate to kind of compare for different policies that we have. Now, these other things you're going to notice a whole lot of vocabulary words, many of these that are going to come up and future sections in here. So you have the political parties. Again, you want to win the elections to get to control the agenda. You need to find candidates. Here in Citrus County, we do not have very many Democrats at all. Not a single county office has been won by a Democrat in a long time. So they're trying to find someone. So if they find someone that's passionate about an issue, they'll encourage them to run for clerk of court or property appraiser or county commissioner. The idea to influence voters, and this is where for party image. Most people don't know very deeply about the different candidates. It's not that they want to be ignorant, but a lot of people just don't, either they don't care or it's not as important to them to find out about lower ones. So if you go to the polls and you have the choice between Republican Daniel Webster or Democrat Dana Cottrell, you may not know difference with them, but because you know with the party, if Republican is more of your political ideology, then you would vote for that person there. That also goes for the parties where they try to develop a platform, or at least in normal times they will. We'll come back to platforms later on. They use it to guide the agenda there. So parties where I mentioned Republicans want less business regulation. So that is part of what they will have when they're having laws there or executive orders. To raise money for the campaigns, to run those campaigns, and then to support the leaders there, and then try to coordinate the different policy making, whether it be at all at one level or even across levels from state and national and local governments for what they want to do. Some vocabulary you got to know. Some of these, again, we're going to come more in detail, like our next section is more about the platform. And here, every 4 years at the convention, normally the political parties do to make a platform that gives the broad idea of what the party's fighting for. Did not happen in the 2020 election for Republicans, since they did not meet too much, and they said they would just follow whatever were Donald Trump's ideas there. But normally that is something that happens. You do not have to, if you're a Republican, follow it per se, but that's the general ideas, which gives the agenda of what they want to do. That will also then make the image of what people believe. Okay, Republicans are this, Democrats are that, Libertarians are this, the Green Party. So that's where you have those different sides. And then people will usually identify. They're Republican, they're Democrat, or as you see on the curve below there in that chart, lean Democrat, lean Republican. And people usually vote the way that they lean. That's why so many of our national elections for president come down to pretty much 8 to 12% of the people. One trend that we've had on here that is not a good trend in my opinion, but you'll notice here where people still have a pretty positive view of their own party there, but the opposite party, and this is where that word polarization comes in, where we've been very polarized in recent years. All right, this slide will be later on when we have the interest groups unit, the exact same one. This is a repeat theme that you need to know. What's the difference between an interest group and a political party? Don't be familiar, know the difference and be able to write about that. First of all, an interest group only cares about their issue that they are fighting for. Political parties have to please everybody. An interest group does not. The NRA cares about guns. They don't care about foreign policy with Israel. Again, the political party, they have to care about guns, foreign policy, healthcare. So that is where they can focus on the issues. Interest groups do not have candidates for office. Now, they may endorse or they support, like the NRA has a grading they do of it, which is a word we use, electioneering, part of what's done there. Interest groups will sometimes develop into a third party. This is where we're going to go with single issue or one issue party. All right, this is really quick of our history and some of the background. Our pass-fail quiz is where we go into and make sure that you remember this, but the basic idea is most of our history we have been a two-party system in there. So the first party system in the early part of our country, we had the Democratic Republicans versus the Federalists. Jefferson was pretty loosely the leader of the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists for Hamilton. Jefferson wanted us to be a society more in agriculture, Hamilton more with business, industry, and trading. Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans believed more in a strict construction and power to the states. The Federalists believed more in a loose construction, power to the federal government. They were also the party that was more business focused. The Federalists will only have John Adams elected officially as president, although Lincoln was very much a Federalist in his ideas, even though Washington was a Federalist in his ideas, although he wasn't officially one. But the party will die out, but even after it dies out for over 30 years, the Marshall Court will continue the Federalist ideas. The Democratic Republicans will later on drop the name Republicans when they are the only party for a while in the 1820s, and then as they split, we will have the Democrats versus the National Republicans, and the National Republicans will eventually become the Whigs. So the Democrats versus the Whigs is our second party system in the 1830s and 1840s. The Democrats were based upon Jackson ideas. There was a lot more ideas for the democracy. This will be after we have universal suffrage. They will continue being more about for the states. The Taney Court will be more state orientated compared to the Marshall Court. Meanwhile, the Whigs are based loosely on Henry Clay's ideas. This is where they want to have the national bank. They want to have tariffs. They want to have internal improvements, which today we call infrastructure. They are more business focused. They are against basically Jackson. That was the one thing that tied them together, was being against Jackson. And so this is where they would be against a lot of that power in the executive branch. The third party system starts with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The issue over the expansion of slavery, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, is where we will have the Democrats split. The Northern Republicans will form that party. They will have people from the Liberty Party, the Free Soilers join them. They will have some things that they will try to entice people from the American or Know Nothing Party there. And that has been ever since 1854 our two parties. Now, they have not been the same there. Some things have completely flip-flopped. We have had, the word you'll need to know is realignment during that time for certain areas. When the Republicans started out, they were very much for federal power. The Democrats were for state power. Now that is the opposite there. So now, for the third party system, a real quick of the errors. From 1860 to 1828, the Republicans pretty much controlled things, but only by a slight margin. Although they will have most of the presidents, they will have more of the years that they control the legislative branch. It was by such a slight margin there was enough checks and balances. Our only Democratic presidents at that time were Johnson, who was not even elected to that position, took over when Lincoln was assassinated, Grover Cleveland, and Woodrow Wilson. But we will have a major change then when we will have 1932. And from 32 until pretty much 68, so in the late 60s, the Democrats will be the ones that will control. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson. So this is the New Deal coalition, which will then go into the Great Society groups that we have. From 68 to present, this is where we will have the Southern Realignment. We will have a switch, which we'll see on some of these maps in here. We have had a lot more of a divided government since that time. And divided government, where you think there are three parts, not the judicial branch, but the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. So whenever you have it where one party controls two of those three and the other one controls one, that's divided government. And that has been what we've had a large amount of the time. Sometimes for good, because sometimes we have found that it has made it where we have had to come to compromise. They're sometimes not so good because we have had the polarization. All right, 3 critical elections. This is in history, that times that you have to know. A critical election is when those 3 parts all switch completely from one party to another. The 1800, Revolution of 1800, which in history, I know when I taught AP US history, used it as an example where we had a peaceful revolution. The Federalists were completely taken over in the House, Senate, and the executive branch by the Democratic Republicans when we went from Adams to Jefferson. And although it wasn't real nice, we did not fire a shot, and we had a changeover in the government. 1860, we will go from the Democrats to the Republicans. 1832, from the Republicans to the Democrats in here. When that happens, in those 3 times, it is party realignment. It cannot happen in 2020 for the simple fact that we right now have a divided government. So Democrats already control the House there. All right, the 1800 election, going a little bit more about this. The key thing about this one to go is the Supreme Court. Although the Federalists will lose and they will not ever again control the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, because of John Marshall and Federalist judges, they will be able to control the Supreme Court, and Federalist ideas will continue on into the 1830s. The 1860, yeah, this one I think you should know from history there when Abraham Lincoln's elected, and we had something like a civil war. I don't know. Maybe you can look that up in there. But yeah, there was something that happened in history there with it. 1932. After the Great Depression had started, we will then have the election of FDR. We will go from Republicans that had dominated in the 1920s to the Democrats in the 1930s. We will have our New Deal in here. You see that word cooperative federalism. We'll get the federalism. We'll kind of go for that idea with it. You notice on that map in there that Franklin Roosevelt had a pretty good victory in there when he won only those states in blue. But another thing I want you to recognize is notice how New England is in red. The heart of the Republican Party in 32 was still in New England, where today New England is very much a stronghold of the Democratic Party. All right, so that is where this change. We have secular realignment. As you look at the maps, the 2 maps on the left, we have in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you will notice that the Deep South is blue, Democrat. Again, the strength of the Republicans was the Northeast. 1904, same thing. When we come now, we have a switch in there. The strength of the Republican Party is the Deep South now, no longer the Democrats in here. New England is the strength of the Democratic Party. In this map of 2012, yes, Florida's blue. Florida, we are not a southern state. I know geographically we are. Demographically, we're more like Ohio than we are Mississippi or Alabama. But that's where we have this shift. That's called the realignment of the different groups that we have. The Southern strategy is a lot of times talked about for what Richard Nixon does. That's starting in the 1972 election. On there. We are starting to see some shifts in some other areas that we're in the middle of, or we're not sure if it actually is. Okay, that's where we have to look and see long term. are, as southern states like Virginia and North Carolina are becoming more like Florida. Will Texas in the near future become a purple state, as we call? Meanwhile, at the other side, the Great Lakes states, which have been pretty strong, like Michigan and Wisconsin, and Iowa and Minnesota, been pretty strong for the Democrats for the last couple of decades. Are they shifting towards Republicans? Again, we have to look at the 2016 election. Was that a blimp, and we're going to go back to normal there, or is that a trend that's occurring? I already answered this. Has there been a critical election in recent years? No. The divided government we had those three critical elections in U.S. history that you do need to know in here. All right, I have not gone over de-alignment. Later on I'll have this. This is a repeat question that seems to confuse people in there. Know the difference between realignment and de-alignment. Realignment is when you have groups of people or sections of the country that shift from one party to another there. De-alignment is when people are going basically not for either party. They're more independent. Now the question I have, what is the trend for the past decade? We have to put an asterisk by that, because the trend overall the past 2 decades has been getting more and more for de-alignment. But this is where for a lot of things right now we have the Trump effect there. We have had a little bit more for the Democrats gaining and less people and the Republicans for younger people. Once again, is that a trend that will continue in the future, or will we get back to more of what was happening with the de-alignment with younger people, with millennials and Gen X?